Hello and welcome to Sophie's chat room. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Courtney Tyler, who specializes in workshops and events on nature connection, wild food foraging, wild crafting, food fermentation, preservation, natural cosmetics, and herbal medicine. I've known Courtney for many years through different kind of incarnations, and I'll let her talk about that in a moment. And I've been to a couple of her foraging and wild medicine workshops, and I've so loved them, highly recommend them. So I wondered, Courtney, if you could tell us a little bit about your journey, your origins, your different projects through your life.
Yeah, okay. This is the first time trying to tell my story out loud, I suppose, so this is new for me. I come from a country that I don't like to say out loud. Lots of judgment involved in the naming of this place that I was born. So I often don't say. In fact, over the last 25 years since I left, I often lie. But you may figure it out or you may not. But I left a long time ago. I left when I was quite young, and kind of have sad origins. I didn't come from a family that I was connected to or protected with, and it's a lot of sadness and realization as my life goes on, the impact that's had on me, you know. But there's an acceptance and kind of constant growth and constant work on being as strong as I can be and finding those grounding practices and self-love in other ways. So I moved out of my house when I was 16, and I had an apartment and a car and a job, and I went to high school and finished high school. And then not long after, as soon as I finished high school, I left the country and I went first to South America. And it's only now that I have a son who's 19 that I look back at 18-year-old Courtney who left to go travel the world and never went back to where home was, not to live. At age 18, that I realized how brave and strong she was, because that's a pretty big thing to do. And so my life experiences have all contributed to, as for all of us, to where I am today and who I am. And they started kind of with that kind of expansion of launching myself out into the world in search of a way to find connection within and a strength, just knowing that where I grew up, it wasn't, I don't know how I knew it so young, but I knew it wasn't for me and I needed to leave. And I think forcing myself out, it was a forcing, because I was so self-conscious at that age, I almost couldn't speak out loud, you know? So when I chose to go out into the world at that age with that level of self-consciousness and inhibition, it was really a kind of forcing myself open, going, I've got to break this, I've got to find a way. And it did it. And it wasn't easy. And all kinds of challenges happened. I was quite vulnerable in the world too. I think I didn't ever learn boundaries or anything. I learned the hard way as I was out alone in the big world. But that was many adventures that happened because of that path. So I was first in South America, in Ecuador, when I was 18. And I didn't stay there very long, but it really blew my mind. I was very attracted to the idea of the sea, the ocean, the coast, the Andes Mountains range, and the jungle. And I had never had much diversity in my childhood. I grew up in a place that was very white, conservative, hillbilly. And so I'd been learning languages in school. I was always really, really fascinated by languages. I studied French first, but Spanish really took my heart. So when I met the reason why I went to Ecuador was just simply because these Ecuadorian folkloric singers that you see all over in the metro stations in Spain and all over Europe playing their panpipes. the indigenous men with their long hair. I was so taken. I'd never really seen anyone so exotic before. And I remember being like, oh, where are you from? I was just talking to them and they told me about this diversity of Ecuador. And I immediately booked tickets to go. I didn't even tell my parents. I didn't tell anyone. I was just like, that's it. I'm going to Ecuador. And there was another story in between that got me my ticket. And that's a different, maybe off on too much of a tangent, but it involved lots of drama and excitement. But it in the end turned into my ticket to South America. And I stayed for a couple of months and later went to study in Spain. I was also drawn to the cultural richness of Europe and all of the different cultures and languages that are so close to each other. And I spent 6 months studying Spanish language and culture in the south of Spain. And there I met a lot of Irish friends that led me to the path that Ireland is now my home for a long time. And I really feel at home in this country and really grateful that my path led me here.
So how long have you been here?
So I've been here since I was 20, and it was my birthday this week. I turned 43, so I'm 23 years in Ireland, maybe 24 almost.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, long now, much longer than I was. Well, now I've crossed the line that it's much longer here than it was that I was in the other place where I was born.
That's it. And you went to Thailand as well, didn't you? Or because I remember Mayfly has its origins, and I'm saying Mayfly, but maybe you should introduce us.
Yeah, I have a lot of names. I don't know how it's happened. Yeah, my name is Courtney, but a lot of people in the world think my name is Mayfly, or that I call myself Mayfly. Really, Mayfly was a shop, and it wasn't even just mine. It was myself and a business partner. So I guess that started when, just to go back a little bit, because it's not long after arriving in Ireland at 20, I had a couple of years of working very hard and paying off a lot of debts. And my life took a very strong turn in the direction of becoming a mother. So my son was born when I was 23, and his father was English, Irish, and a beautiful, beautiful man, who sadly died 3 years later due to a brain hemorrhage, which was very sudden. And my son lives on in him in his exuberance of life and his kind of magnetic attraction to people and communication and connecting with people. So Sean lives on in Mailuka in a major way that's very beautiful. And I think then that's where it connects to the next part of the story, where then at age 23 to 26, being a really young mother, I did a lot of brainstorming about how I would like to make my living best. And really looking at, okay, being a young mother, none of my friends had children at that age. I was really exploring what were my dreams and what would fit into this parameter of allowing me to dedicate most of my time and energy to this young human being, but also make a living doing something I loved. And I scribbled out in my pregnancy, I scribbled out loads of lists of pros and cons of all of my passions. And the biggest one was that I would travel abroad to markets around the world. I had spent a little bit of time in Morocco when I was living in the south of Spain. I went over a couple of times, and the exoticness of souks and markets, and yeah, I was so drawn to exploring, going to new countries. So I made that a reality not long after. I studied naturopathy for a little bit of period in between before Luca's father passed away. But when I realized I was on my own without other family here to help me raise my son, I stopped my studies at that time and just concentrated on being a mother and running this business that was my dream. And I remember approaching Ruth of Om Diva in the market in Georgia Street Arcade and saying, I really want to do what you're doing. It's my dream. I've planned it all out. I'm just not sure where to start. But I'm inspired by what you do. I see you doing what I've planned. And I would love to chat to you about it sometime. And I think she invited me to work with her. And I could work on the weekends when my son was with his father. And for a couple of years I did that, and I ran her market stalls for her. And I guess I just garnered the courage to begin to do it for myself. So I went on my first trip to Thailand, not long after. I was still probably about 24 years old, 25 maybe. And I had never gone somewhere so far or so exotic at that time, up to date. Morocco was very exciting for me, but Thailand also was another paradigm shift of an absolutely different kind of culture. And I just get so inspired by experiencing these little bursts of culture. So I went back and forth to Thailand and later to Indonesia and other places many times in the next 15 years, I suppose. And it allowed me I could work it in a way that I could buy jewelry materials and stones and silver. Primarily, I was making my own jewelry with the things I was buying, but also I was buying things for festivals and markets.
Yeah, that's where I met you the first time.
Yeah,
I remember.
I remember too. Yes.
Yeah.
So I made my living mostly making jewelry all week while I was at home for Luca, and on the weekends doing festivals or markets or big exhibitions in the RDS. And that allowed me to do both things. So to be very creative, to travel the world, and to be a full-time parent to my son with the help of really good friends, I have to say. I couldn't have done it alone without family. It takes a community to raise a child. And I think that's something really missing in our world. But I did have huge support from friends, and I'm very grateful to them.
Lovely.
So that was the birth of Mayfly. I suppose it had different names. So my business was called Dancing Dragon Designs at the very start. I have a dragon tattoo on my foot. It was far more painful than childbirth or any other painful thing I've ever experienced in my life. But I did this so long ago, and I don't fear pain. It later became Mayfly when I had a business partner, and we decided to open up a space called Mayfly that we both would trade from. And she later moved on to Australia, and I continued with the name. And I think it was around the time that I was realizing, we all were, how Facebook has its tentacles into us. And I didn't want to be Courtney Tyler on Facebook. So I thought I'd just be Mayfly and be anonymous. But of course, none of us are anonymous, are we? They still know everything about us if we use these platforms. But that's the reason why Mayfly became my online persona long ago. And so there's sometimes confusion about who's Courtney, who's Mayfly. And then my business now with the foraging and wildcrafting is Hips and Haws Wildcrafts.
Yeah, so hips and haws as in rose hips and hawthorn.
Yes, very good. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the transition between Mayfly and hips and haws? How did it come about?
I guess Mayfly grew and grew to become something that, had I been a more savvy businesswoman, I might have known how to manage or juggle a bit better. It grew into something I was really proud of. It was a very, very creative shop in Temple Bar in the end. Sometimes I took on far more than I could handle. And I look back at those years when I had a young son and go, how on earth did I do that? I had sometimes, at the peak of madness, I would set up one market stall on a Saturday morning, leave staff there, and set up my tent in my gazebo and all the stock and all the displays I'd built. And then I would go and do that sometimes in 2 other markets. Sometimes I did 3 in one day.
Wow.
Major operation. I actually don't know how I did that. And then eventually had the shop as well. And I would do a Sunday market I was in People's Park in Dunleary for almost 7 years. So I was there every Sunday. And then sometimes at the same time, I'd have an RDS major exhibition. And so that was kind of where things fell apart a bit. It's not possible to do all those things when you're one person. And I didn't really know how to delegate. I managed really well. And it was during the boom. So it was kind of, I was quite fortunate. And it was a time when I felt lots of support, and everything I put out was well received and appreciated by everyone, which felt really nice when I could make them myself. A lot of the things were made. And then also, depending on what it was, a lot of things were bought that I would find from creative people in my travels. So yeah, that is what Mayfly became, and it was a beautiful thing, especially the shop. That was my kind of something I was really proud of, because when you walked into the space, it was a lot of upcycled, recycled, reimagined, steampunk. I had 6 different labels or brands that I had created. There was Oh Boy cufflinks, Fanny Westgate collection. There was the steampunk. There was sterling silver jewelry. Everything had its own. There was wild card accoutrements. It was kind of cheap and fun, quirky, odd bits that would be under €20 because all the tourists coming in would just like mementos. So I had created all these brands, and they all had their own labels and stickers and tags and images, and I love that creativity. And I could understand how things are presented is really important to perception and value, and I like the psychology of all of that. But eventually I had then met my partner, James, my partner at the time, and we were together for the last 10 years. And as I moved out to Wicklow to live with him, I just found the challenge of driving into Dublin every day one part of a major challenge. The time involved with driving there every day was a lot, but also I think the social pressures, the social, what do you call it? The difficulties of the sad side of life in Dublin. I think the problems with drugs in particular.
Okay.
You really feel it when you live in Temple Bar or you spend every day there.
Sure.
And the pressure that sometimes people would be held up with a syringe who worked for me, or there was a time that in the building that people brought the guns in, or lots of social difficulties that I felt as a heavy pressure. And yeah, kind of made me feel down a bit to be facing those things each day.
Mm-hmm.
And more my time was spent in Wicklow. At this stage, I had acquired some goats, and I was growing my own food. And I was connecting more to nature after having lived in the city for so long. I was really embracing these kind of country practices.
And you were in your late 30s then, or?
Yeah, so I was in my mid-30s, young mid-30s.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of strong feelings about food and where it comes from, and I suppose it was really important to me to have livestock and to realize what's involved in that, in the procurement of quality milk. And then I'm dairy intolerant and quite allergic to milk, so cow's milk is out of the question, but usually goat's milk was kind of okay. And I just had the values of really wanting to know where my food came from and seeing what I could produce myself or trade with other locals around me, that it would be local and seasonal and as natural as possible. So having goats was a big part of that. And it was so much work as well. I have to say, I have so much respect for people who choose to work with animals in the land, because it's an immense amount of work. And I had friends who would help me milk the goats sometimes if I ever had to go away. And so it was massive responsibility and expense. And I sold the milk sometimes to people who really valued raw goat's milk, but there's no way that, probably being practical, which you need to be, there's no way, even if I charged €5 or €6 for a bottle of that milk, that it covered the costs, you know. And I didn't charge that much because you can't charge that much for a liter of milk. But that wouldn't even have come close to covering the costs of actually doing that, you know. It was more for love, and for experience.
How many did you have?
So at one stage, when things got crazy, there were 15 goats. Yeah, they were everywhere and they were crazy. And yeah, my favorite part was kidding and breeding them, and when helping the kids come into the world. That was so magical to me. So yeah, that was one of my favorite things. And yeah, eventually there was just way too many. But it brought up all kinds of learning about food systems, because I was a vegetarian for a long time in my life. I now eat meat as well, especially if it's ethical or local or sustainable, particularly like wild venison. There's a lot of deer in Wicklow that are culled each year because of overpopulation. So for me, it seems like a very sustainable wild food, and that's in line with my values. But having goats made me realize on a deeper level, I don't know, there's so many ways to look at it. There's no black and white and there's no right and wrong. I mean, there's things that aren't in line with my value system with meat production. But like if you drink cow's milk or goat's milk, male animals are born and they become meat because otherwise, or they're culled at birth, which is a huge waste, I think. But it's interesting just to note, kind of only through having had my own animals did I fully realize where the lines meet up. So if you're vegetarian and having any milk products, there's an inherent meat coming into the question there. And I don't know if I'm being clear in describing that, but there were lots of realizations and experience that was really valuable.
You're experiencing the interconnection, I suppose, between the animal world and our world, and how our food intake, the type of food we eat, impacts on their cycle. So
I guess it was a really interesting insight, and a lot of work and huge commitment, but really valuable. It was amazing for me to have the opportunity to have had my own animals and to connect with animals at a new level. I had never really had pets, so for me it was a pretty big leap to having 15 big goats. They were very large animals and full of personality. So
goats are great. Love goats. So, and hips and haws.
Yeah, that's where I was going. I was wondering, I got off track. That's why it was difficult going from Temple Bar and social difficulties to this new life where I was much more immersed in animals and nature and land and growing food. And so that was the connection. I found it more and more difficult to return to Dublin on a daily or often basis as I needed to run my business. So I decided with huge regret and difficulty to give it up. It was hard on my heart. I had built something really beautiful that I was really proud of, but I also was really yearning for this new life that I was experiencing that was far more connected to the seasons and the land around me. And I had a woman who worked closely with me, a Lithuanian couple who took over the shop, and they'd worked with me for a couple of years, so they were able to kind of benefit from inheriting a beautiful shop, and it's still going really well for them. So they're in the same space now, and I walked away. And sometimes I have pangs of heartache from having left that, but also no regrets because I have chosen a different path that nourishes me as well. So that was me walking away from that older life, and that was probably about 7 years ago. And from then till now, I have spent much of my time constantly learning from books and people who inspire me, and learning by doing more than anything else. So like I mentioned my son earlier, his name is Luca. He's a fine human being, young man, and but he's 19 now, almost 20. But many of these 7 years ago, I was still driving him to school every day and very much needing to of course, be a very present mother. Whereas now I'm finding myself in this position that I have, it's a new era for me, a new chapter in my life. He's a young man now studying nursing and going to university. So I think at the time, the 7 years that I spent studying for myself and really practicing fermentation, wild food, herbal medicine, all these things on a daily basis, I did because I couldn't go anywhere else to study. I needed to stay home and be present for Luca and my family. So I was really good at self-studying. I'm really passionate and I like to learn by doing. So I was very practical in thinking that instead of going to Cork, for example, for the herbal medicine course with the herbal medicine school there, which I would have liked to have done, I decided to buy the materials, and all the time and money I would have spent traveling there and tuition, I spent on materials and books and just learned on my own in my fermentation shed.
Mm-hmm. And who were your main teachers as well? Because you've studied with Judith Hode.
Yeah, Judith Hode was a huge inspiration to me and many, many, many people in Ireland. She's been around a long time and she's a tough cookie. She's a character. So she was at the beginning of my journey. As soon as I was leaving Temple Bar and my shop behind, before I'd fully left it, I did her 6-month apprenticeship.
In Donegal.
Yeah. So I traveled up to the wilds of Donegal every month and stayed for a very long weekend with her. And it was one of the last courses she ever offered. And there were 6 of us on the course, and we would sit around her big dining table. And she'd open up her big book that she'd kind of written of everything she'd collected over all of the years of her life. And there was something so simple and special about it. You know, it was a beautiful thing to learn from someone who was sharing their world experiences. And she learned the hard way, because there wasn't the internet and there wasn't the abundance of books always then as there is now, especially when you're way up in the wilds of Donegal. So yeah, she lives off grid. She's in her mid-80s now, and she's still living. I'll be going up to Donegal next week, actually. I hope to see her. As far as I know, she's still going strong on her mountain on her own, and her fierce independence. So she inspired me greatly.
Yeah, it is inspiring indeed. She lives exactly the way she talks, and her beliefs and are totally in keeping with what she's been writing about and teaching and raising awareness about. Yeah, she's a force of nature. I agree. Who else were your inspirational figures and teachers, in fermentation, for example, or in foraging mushrooms, etc.? Where did you learn? Because foraging for mushrooms in Ireland is relatively new. It's not something that was super popular a few years back.
Yeah, so first my journey started much more with plants and plants as medicine and as food. And I remember it being a very conscious and something I really considered, would I take the leap to study mushrooms? I was very drawn to them, but also I was, like most people, I think, completely intimidated by the amount of work that would be required to start to open up that world. Because at first, especially beginning, my eyes couldn't see the differences that they could see now. It took a long time to learn and focus in on the minute details that are required to be safe in identifying mushrooms. And it was very daunting for me at the start. I didn't grow up having this knowledge. I didn't have no grandmother who took me out walking every weekend or summer or winter or autumn to look for mushrooms or wild food. So for me, this journey was, it was always calling to me, especially plants and plants as medicine, with my my young 20s and wanting to study naturopathy. Things like homeopathy and herbal medicine and acupuncture have always been important medicine for me personally on my path. When I feel weak or in need of support, those are areas I turn to. But they're quite dependent on someone else's skills, which is also okay. But I really like the idea of autonomy in using what grew around me as medicine, and also as food, and food being medicine. So first it started with plants, but as mushrooms, maybe it was in the last 5 years, I've really dedicated a lot of my time and energy to mushrooms. And I don't know if it was me dedicating it, and then it turned into maybe the mycelium's taking over. I wonder if the mycelium is taking over my brain and they're now running me to do their calling. I don't know. It feels like that sometimes.
Yeah, it seems to be so much more in the general kind of collective unconscious, the whole mycelium and the entanglement below our feet and all of that. It's fascinating. And rewilding as well. It's very much in the cultural zeitgeist at the moment. It's lovely. How important to what we're experiencing now in terms of ecological emergencies and crises, how important you feel rewilding, foraging, fermenting, autonomy, self-reliance is.
Yeah, it's a bit devastating sometimes to see the level of disconnection there is, and to realize how far we've come away from these practices that nourished and sustained us in the past. And I guess I've had some experiences where for a little while I was working for Quilcha. They'd set up this forest schools called Compass Club. And we often get busloads of students, young children from Dublin and different places. And it was really shocking. I know this is true, but like to see sometimes the amount of children who weren't used to walking on uneven ground that they found walking in the forest was a bit of a shock to them because they were used to footpaths and parking lots. And I mean, I'm not exaggerating. That was actually not unusual. And, you know, the connection we have to children knowing where their food comes from, and I don't know, this connection to the seasons and the plants and nature around us. I think we're all losing touch with that. And I also grew up very not connected to it. It's been a journey for me. I remember at the start, when I looked around on a walk, I just saw a sea of green and trees. It was a tree. It wasn't a certain tree for me, or I could spot maybe a dandelion, but really most of the plants and trees just turned into green for me, and I couldn't distinguish what I was looking at. I wish I would have grown up with this connection, but it was a very conscious and something I worked really hard at, you know, to decipher one by one what these things were that I was looking at. And I'm still on that path. It will take a lifetime. It's a beautiful journey for me to have this constant learning that nature gives me, because I'm never going to get there and know it all. So it's really rewarding and exciting as each new plant or tree presents themselves to me, or mushroom. And it makes me feel very connected to the seasons as they change, the plants and trees and their different life cycles, and further this work and maybe showing what I do know, sharing it with people as I feel called to do, connects me more to the community, more to people around me. I feel a deeper sense of connection within myself. So all of that has given me something really beautiful that I want to keep. It inspires me to continue on this journey and to dedicate myself to these things.
And I love how you include rituals in your workshops as well. It's like almost, it is in a way, it reminds me of shamanism, and it's a form of really connecting with the land and thanking, asking for permission before picking up a wild plant, and thanking after this kind of practices. I just find them so beautiful to learn and to connect with, and also to leave behind what you were saying in the wild plant foraging workshop I went to. You were saying, leave some behind. You don't need to pick everything, just leave some for nature, which is lovely. And yes, can you tell us a little bit more about your attitude, your connection to land, and how shamanic it is, even in terms of your rituals, your connection to the seasonality and the times of the year, and and the fact that you're sharing your passion through workshops as well. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I actually never imagined that I could, for one, stand in front of people and put myself in front of people. I suppose through the markets, I did that first, and it was a big challenge for me. Like I told you in my background, I was really inhibited. So first it was a challenge for me to stand in front of people in the market, but actually they were coming into my gazebo, into my space that I had created. Even if it was only a 3 by 3 meter space, it was manageable first step for me. But to think now that sometimes I'm invited to be a speaker at Herb Feast, or sometimes for bigger events, or more often now for podcasts, I still get a huge terror in my heart and I want to say no and run away. But I really am embracing this year more than ever before, saying yes to those things that scare me in order to grow. So even this, I might not show, I don't know how much it makes me nervous to do this, but have a podcast with you. I really am doing it for personal growth. Not that I necessarily yet feel like, oh, I just dying to do podcasts. Stories. I feel really like, does someone really want to hear my stories? I don't know. But anyway, I'm challenging myself and saying yes to all these things that strike fear in me. So it's brought me all kinds of places this year, including the journey to shamanism, because shamanism isn't something I've connected to with an awareness throughout my life. I felt the word was quite far from me. I didn't really have a connection to it. And this year, as I was choosing a massive transition, like I mentioned this time that my son is, becoming a young man, and he's a beard and his own coffee business, and he's studying to be a nurse, and he's living in Dublin. So I have this renewed kind of freedom to explore who I am and what my next 10 years would I like them to look like. So I manifested massive change. Some of it's been very painful in the past year, but it started this year with a trip to South America, back to Ecuador, back to that country that I went to when I first left home. And that was because I met this teacher of mine. She's a shaman. Well, they don't say that word in South America. They say curandera, which is healer. They don't use the word shaman. But that whole terminology just felt a bit foreign to me. And I've always connected to the values of it. I've always felt the soul in plants and animals, or the way that the language is and the way we connect is very much inside me. But the terminology I'd never explored before, or the reality, the practice of it. So when I went to Ecuador in February this year, I went for 6 weeks on my own. And part of that time was meeting this woman I met last year in Herb Feast. We were both speakers at Herb Feast. Her name is Rocio. And I just, hearing her Ecuadorian accent and connecting with her, she was enthralled by the magical transformation of fermentation that I was doing at the event. And I was equally enthralled by her talk about ayahuasca and about other plant medicine and her experiences living with different tribes in the jungles. And I think we were equally taken with each other, and I immediately signed up for the course that she was going to offer this February in the jungle. And that was my first exploration of shamanism intentionally, and it rocked my world. Those 6 weeks were so incredible. I haven't yet shared many of the stories with people, but I'd like to. I think that sometimes I've told them to a close friend or two, and they're like, you have to write that down, or you have to find a way to share that story. They kind of, I don't know if now is the right time, because even the short stories seem to take a little while for me to tell the details to share the experience. But maybe yeah.
Nugget. One of them.
God, it was so much in it. I guess I have, I was in many places again of Ecuador. I was high up in the Andes Mountains, and I was also deep in the jungle. I didn't go to the coast, but I spent time in both places. And deep in the jungle, I met truly wild people. I met, through Rocio and the work that she does, she has a kind of a space she's bought over many years, a bit of land to save it from the petroleum companies, and to try and hold on to a piece of this wildness before it's gone. And it's quickly disappearing all around her. When we were there, deep in her special space of this protected, right near the Yasuni National Park, which is also meant to be protected, the sounds all night long with the petroleum company machines, and the pipes were everywhere. The landscape was absolutely destroyed, and devastating to see firsthand. I know this because you hear it on the news, but to see it in front of you like that, it was shocking and devastating, and it looks like the end of the world. I was in 2 different places in the jungle. One was pristine and untouched still, and where I was with her has been quickly, it won't be there for long. So the people who live truly wild, some of the tribes were uncontacted tribes, which now, me saying that I met them, obviously they're not uncontacted, but they have had almost no interaction with the outside world. But because they're losing their land so fast, they met Rocio in the past at some stage. Most of the time they kill strangers or petroleum workers or neighboring tribes. They're quite vicious and primal. They have their blow darts with curare on the tips, and it's an instant death that you don't even know it's happened. They're absolutely perfect at shooting their arrows, their little darts, and you wouldn't see it coming. And they were pretty savage killers. That was the usual way to keep themselves safe. And so we got to meet these people. Rocio had explained to them they don't speak a common language. Their language is very it's their own because they're uncontacted, but they communicated on some levels. Rocio speaks many of the dialects, and she wanted to show them how to begin to interact with the outside world because they're going to have to. And so she invited them to come see it, to visit us, as that we were safe for them to come and visit. And they usually are naked and barefoot in the woods and in the forest. And they came kind of wearing really interesting. They put some clothes on for us because they knew that they might feel self-conscious. The what do you call it? The evangelical Christians are, as always, very strong, even in the middle of the jungle, telling them they should be ashamed for being naked. So they had on random bits of clothing to meet us, and didn't really make sense, like a Donald Duck t-shirt or, I don't know, strange pair of shoes. It was a bit sad because really, that wasn't natural to them.
Yeah.
But they came and danced with us and sang with us, and they played with our bras. They couldn't believe we would wear such silly bras. They took them off, and then they made these amazing clothes out of palm fiber. Well, not clothes, this bra they made. I brought one home with me. It was just maybe 20 meters of palm fiber they'd made of string that they wound around and around and around, and they'd wear one facing this way and one facing this way.
Beautiful.
Well, for very little support, I think, but it was really fun to experience the way that they dressed, and they kind of just had so much fun playing with us, really, and that was very magical. I felt so honored. We even went one day, they brought us in on a walk into the rainforest to show us how to make curare. Do you know what curare is?
It's which from what you said, it's a poison. So
Yeah,
plant, is it, or?
it's from a vine, and it's really fascinating. Again, like most knowledge they acquire, they say that they get this knowledge from ayahuasca or other plants, that the plants, to them, they all just speak to them and tell them what they do, what they need. Either the plant directly tells them, or ayahuasca gives them the visions that tells them. So curare is a vine that's highly toxic, but we all know curare in our hospitals. It's general anesthetic. Amazing, something could be so toxic yet be safe to consume for them. And yeah, a lot of tribes have lost these skills. There was all levels of tribes we saw, of indigenous peoples in Ecuador living quite Western lives, to living on the edges of Western society, to these truly wild people that had all the skills still, that they lived, as they always had, very wild. It was amazing to see them, actually they had a machete, so they were using modern tools. But the way that they just kind of grabbed a leaf and grabbed a branch and grabbed a vine, and would create vessels to make the curare. So they took a vine and they scraped away some of the material from inside the vine into little powder kind of shavings. And then they made this vessel out of this very big leaf that they tied together with a vine, and then they put a strong stick into the earth. So it was like this beautiful, perfect vessel. It was just like the supermarket was all around him. All the things he needed to create anything he wanted was just instantly procured from all of this massive abundance and diversity.
Yeah.
It was just so beautiful to see how natural that was. I've never seen anything like it.
And in terms of food, what did you eat that they offered, or did they offer you food?
No, they didn't offer us food. I would have really liked that. Yeah, we were all eating food with the retreat and the group of people that we were. There was about 16 of us, and this is not Rocio's fault or anything like that. And I highly recommend anyone to go on our course. But I, along with many others, had very severe gastroenteritis for much of my trip.
Oh.
And so, yeah, eating was not a major factor of my time while I was away. But yeah, I was relieved that I recovered quickly upon returning home. I was a bit worried after 4 weeks of severe gastroenteritis that I might not recover easily, but it was, yeah. After leaving the jungle with Rocio, I went up to high up in the Andes Mountains with a couple of girlfriends, and we went to a big market, Otavalo, and we were going to spend a few days traveling around. But the gastroenteritis really hit me at this stage, and I couldn't leave my bed for 7 days. I had just had the ayahuasca experience, which was not like everyone else talks about an ayahuasca experience. Mine was not like that. There was no visions, no colors, it wasn't what I thought it might be. However, my week in bed with no food and just some black tea for 7 days and too weak to leave my bed gave me a lot of time to reflect on my experiences that later proved themselves to be very worthwhile and profound, even if I didn't have the experience I thought I was having. So my girlfriends left and went to the beach, like, to the coast. They flew a long ways away. And I was okay on my own staying in a very safe guest house where the people were looking after me. And they were very concerned about how sick I was, but I also knew that I would recover. At one stage, though, I got a text message from a friend of mine who I knew from those 25 years ago in Ecuador. He lived in Quito, and we were going to meet, but hadn't yet met each other. And he knew I was interested in shamanism. He said, by the way, where you're staying, not far away, is someone who's highly regarded shaman, and maybe you should get in contact. And I was way too sick to leave my bed, but it was playing on my mind. But the directions were very vague. It was like, go to this next village, ask for so-and-so, make sure it's the father, not the son. He lives up on a hill. That was it. Like, it was kind of vague, but I'd have to ask around. And also, there was a list of things that if I chose to go, that I needed to bring with me. It's probably one of my favorite text messages I ever got. It was in Spanish, and it was like, go meet the father, not the son, go up the hill, ask around, you'll find him. If you go, bring 12 roses, a bottle of cologne, 4 eggs, a candle, and 3 or 4 things more. They were. So it was quite a shopping list, especially when I couldn't move out of my bed. But the woman of the house, but I had assumed she would value traditional medicine and shamanism or a healer, but she didn't. She thought it was rubbish. But she asked for me anyways in the village, and she came back and said, wow, everyone thinks he's pretty amazing, even if I don't believe in it. I just thought I'd let you know that. And she offered to go and buy the list of things I would need if I wanted to go see him. So she did. And I decided then after 7 days in bed that I would have my taxi friend, who was this cool Otavalo man with this big long plait, and he was kind of really happy to be my best friend and drive me anywhere I needed to go. So he drove me to the village, and we asked around and found the shaman's house. And I was advised to go very early in the morning. I was a bit concerned that I was just showing up at someone's doorstep and not letting them know I was coming, or what would it be like. I kind of couldn't imagine what was going to happen when I arrived to this door. It was all very unknown to me, but I thought, why not? I definitely need to give this a go. So as I was dropped off about 7 a.m. to this strange building, it was quite unusual. A lot of the level of poverty in Ecuador was a bit striking to me. I didn't realize the level of widespread poverty. Most houses that I saw, a lot of them were concrete block and wood and dirt floors, really simple. was kind of these half-rounded, strange 3-story building with all these colors in it. It was his house. And I think because he was such a successful shaman, he made good money. So this was his way of showing his wealth. It was this kind of very funny house. But I went around the back. Someone said, follow the rooster around the corner. And I walked around the back door, and there was 3 or 4 people waiting, and they looked at me like I was an alien. They were like, what is she doing here? They were, after I sat down for a while and spoke to them, I told the taxi that I would be there for quite a while, and I'd give them a call if I was staying or if I needed to be collected again. And I spoke to these people. They had traveled from all over Ecuador and Colombia to be there. They were kind of very rural folk who had traveled a long time. None of them had the bag of things I had brought, eggs and cologne and roses and things. They didn't have anything like that, but they had all of their belongings in a plastic bag, and they'd been waiting for days to see him.
Wow. And
every morning at 7 a.m. he would release 8 tickets for the day. And I didn't know where all 8, they didn't know where all 8 gone, or did I have a chance to still get in? So they said, well, at 10 o'clock he sees his first person, so you can just wait. And at 10 o'clock, as he called in the first people, I kind of went behind them and said, excuse me, hello. I just wanted to say hello, and I was told to come see you. And he was very intrigued by me. Him and his wife were standing at the door, and they looked very suspicious. I don't think many foreigners knocked on this door. I think I was one of the few. Yeah. And he said that there was one more ticket, and if I would return at 4 p.m., at some stage after 4, he would see me that day. So I was really grateful, and I called my taxi friend, and I had many hours to go kill, but I was so feverish and so weak from my month of sickness that I kind of walked deliriously through the streets of the market. It was Saturday, and I went back to Otavalo, but I had to sit down often near fainting, and just kind of, luckily I didn't come across any bad fortune, because I probably wasn't in the best state to be walking the streets. And I returned back for my meeting at 4 o'clock, and I think I had another 3 hours to wait before I was seen. So I was sitting next to this really kind woman. A lot of people would come with their entire family. So one ticket meant one session. It might be you on your own, or it might be everyone in your family would squeeze into this room. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I had this beautiful moment with this woman who, I took a picture of the 2 of us sitting next to each other, and we were just really interested in chatting for hours. And finally, when I got called in, both of us didn't know what to expect. I was like, what's going to happen when I go inside? She was like, I have no idea. And as I walked into the room, it was kind of this dark, concrete block, cavernous, cave-like room. And there was a table in front of me with skulls and feathers and animals and stones, things on it. Mm-hmm. And some candles were lit in a circle on the floor. And a candle was lit between me and the shaman and his wife, who invited me in.
Oh, his wife was there?
Yes, it's very important they worked together. Yeah, apparently both times the shaman I met, the curandero that I met in the jungle, was with his wife as well. Sometimes it's the wife who's the curandera, and then the husband's there. But they were explaining to me how important it was they worked together in both circumstances. And so they were obviously coming from very different practices. The jungle curandero would have very different practices to this highland mountain one. When I was in the mountains, he spoke Quechua, and he spoke very, very basic Spanish. But luckily we could communicate really nicely. He spoke quite childlike, and it was very sweet. And him and his wife welcomed me in, and asked me if I wanted to do a candle reading to determine what the session would be like. So they lit the candle, and for about 15 minutes, he had only asked me very few questions. He asked me, did I live in Ecuador? And the answer was no. And I'd said I'd been in the jungle the week before, and that I was quite ill. I don't think I had said anything else about myself, but he, after lighting the candle, spoke of many things about my life and about me specifically, and said, I can see that you did ayahuasca in the jungle, and your path is clear to me. And that blew my mind, because when I did ayahuasca, my intention was, please let my path be clear to me. That was my question. So when he said, your path is clear to me, I can see that you did ayahuasca, I got so many goosebumps all over my body. And it was a bit like, oh my God. So he spoke immediately about the work that I was doing, and it was close to the earth and close to nature, and it was inspiring people, and that it was my path. And when I went home, I was going to find that this was the right path for me, and I was going to have lots of support from the world, and I was going to grow in this. And that also he said he saw in me that I was a curandera, and that he wanted to initiate me into this.
Brilliant.
And while I had never, like I said, I hadn't ever had much experience reading about shamanism or exploring that world or seeking to be a curandera myself, it felt really nice for him to explain that he saw that in me and that he would like to initiate me into that. He invited me also that should I ever want to study with him, I could go live there and study with him for any length of time.
Brilliant.
Yeah, that was quite exciting.
It's like an initiation. It feels like an initiation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did they tell you why it was important to work together? Why with his wife?
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit?
Yeah. So it was the jungle shaman who told us that. He said that they were there together, that when he goes under the trance, he's vulnerable to spirits attacking and different things. So the wife is there standing by in a protective sort of sense. And she also is the one who prepares the medicine. In the case of the ayahuasca, she was the one who prepares it. She gathers it and prepares it, and then he serves it. He takes it himself. Like I mentioned, my ayahuasca ceremony wasn't as I thought it would be, but that was due to my own expectations, not that anyone ever told me what it was going to be like. It was much more that he, as the curandero, took the medicine and then looked into us to see what he saw in a more medical sense or emotional, all the levels, but he, with the ayahuasca in his body, could look in and see inside me. And he saw things that were physical things in my body that I know about, that no one can tell by looking at me. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was and emotional things and childhood things. He was very specific about the things he saw. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it was quite shocking. But that was the reason why they worked very close together. So she would prepare the medicine and he would consume it. And they worked very closely together. So in the case in the mountains, it was also the same. I don't know if that was the reason, the protection, but she was playing the drum, for example. The second part of the story is the part that was really something. So, so remember, I don't know where I am. I can't believe I have just arrived here and I've been waiting all day and I don't know what I'm walking into. And I'm all alone and no one knows I'm here. Well, my taxi friend, but I was really still feeling quite daunted and my heart was beating really fast. I felt very safe. They both had very kind faces. And I immediately felt at ease and that I was not in danger or I was safe. In fact, I felt that in every moment of my trip, traveling alone as a woman. Before leaving, I had this fear, would I be safe? At every moment there, I felt very safe. People treated me like family everywhere I went. And this was no exception. When I walked into the space of this curandero's house, I felt very safe and secure. Mm-hmm. So when after my candle reading of 15 minutes, that he told me very specific things about my life and my path. The next thing was a bit shocking. He said, okay, well, stand up now and take off all your clothes. And he was like, you can leave your underwear on. But I actually wasn't wearing any. I didn't bring enough with me. I wasn't wearing anything. I was like, oh, God, like... Anyway, I asked the wife, I was like, are you going to be here too? She was like, oh yeah, don't worry. Like, of course I will be here. You're safe. And they left the room. They gave me a candle and told me to cleanse myself. And luckily I knew what to do because Rocio had taught us a couple of healing ceremonies with the candles and with the eggs. So I knew to cleanse myself with this candle, starting at my head and going down my body. And later the candle was lit and burnt down to the ground. But luckily, as he handed me this and told me to get naked, I knew what to do with the candle. And I just decided
that you knew as well, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I had given them my roses and my candles and the very stinky cologne because I didn't know what the cologne was for. I wish I had known. But anyway, I took off all my clothes and it was quite a dark room. And as they came back in, they invited me to stand in this circle. The candles were burning all around me. And it started with, he cleansed me with the eggs. I don't know if anyone knows the shamanic egg ceremonies, but eggs are a symbol of so much: transformation, fertility, life force, energy. They have all of these things, especially that they're unfertilized eggs. That's the very important part. And yeah, they have all the potential of life, you know.
Yeah. They need to be unfertilized because
that way the I guess the potential for life is more there, isn't it? Or I don't know. Oh, I don't know what it is. Maybe because, yeah, I don't know. I don't remember if I knew that part of the answer. But Rocio had explained it was very important to find unfertilized eggs.
Okay.
So he cleansed me with 4 eggs. We'd only learned I think we only used 1 in our own personal ceremonies that we learned, but he held 2 in each hand. So he was like this huge power of egg cleansing on me. It's this energetic cleansing. And all of this, anything that you need that doesn't serve you goes into the egg. And later the eggs are kind of smashed and buried outside. And you don't even look back, you know. So he did the 4 egg ceremony first, cleansed me all over with these eggs. And he's chanting and saying very beautiful things, which I was relieved because the amount of evangelists and religion was a very big part of my time there. Everyone who sat next to me in the bus might like to try and convert me to Catholicism or Christianity or save my soul. And I think a lot of the curanderos might have bits of that too, but I was really relieved because he was talking my language. He was kind of giving me blessings that were very earth-centric and very natural. And there wasn't much talk of God. He was saying beautiful, beautiful incantations. And like I said, his Spanish was very childish and very sweet and very pure and beautiful. So he was just saying that I would feel contented and that I would be strong and that I would have all the support of the universe behind me and that I was going to really help other people and beautiful things, you know, that you want, you know, very meaningful things to have someone wishing for you and doing with all these magical accoutrements around them. So as I stood there naked, first it was the egg ceremony and the wife was in the corner playing the drums. And then there was the rose petals. They were smashed up, they were ripped off the roses. And then the cologne was poured all over them. And then he said, cleanse yourself, hold out your hands and cleanse yourself with these roses. And I washed my face first and the cologne stained my eyes. It was really stinky cologne. And it was like burning my eyes and I'm rubbing my body and cleansing myself with these, you know, infused rose petals. And he was banging rocks and stones. And then the next thing, he was blowing fireballs at me. He was lighting the alcohol on fire and shooting fireballs at my body and telling me to turn around and turn around. And I was getting a bit dizzy and fireballs were kissing my skin. It was crazy and amazing and beautiful. And all the time he's saying these beautiful things about how whole I'll be and how, yeah, just amazing. And then it was finished.
And how did you feel? Or, yeah, tell us about what happened after, I suppose, to your...
Yeah, it was late at night when I finished. It was very dark outside. And I guess being on the equator, there's equal parts day and night. So I think 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. is sunlight. It was already maybe 8 or 9 o'clock at this stage at night. And it was very cold up in the mountains in the air. And I remember leaving. I was kind of swooshed out quite quickly afterwards, but with the invitation that I can always go back and I can always study with him. And that he doesn't say this to many people, but he was saying it to me, he said. And also that he would love to come to Ireland if ever I wanted to make that happen. I could bring him and his wife here. So that's something I would consider. And
would you consider studying with him over there at some point?
yeah, maybe a part of me is very drawn to going back. I really would like to bring other people there, like a small group of people from Ireland, to help, just to show them some of the places I went to and the experiences I had that they could also have. I would love to do that, but it does not no longer seem like the year for that with the current climate, but one day I might do that.
Mm.
But I felt, well, my gastroenteritis was gone.
Brilliant.
My fever was gone. I felt elated. I felt really like, wow, that was one of the most magical things I think I've ever experienced. And yeah, I just felt a deep contentment and excitement.
So, wow, that was an amazing experience, Courtney. So, how did you manage to integrate this in your journey back to Ireland? What happened after?
Yeah, I guess I, after meeting that shaman curandero up in the high in the Andes Mountains, I felt a huge reprieve from the sickness I'd felt. I had severe gastroenteritis for nearly the whole 4 weeks previous to that. And I had maybe 2 more weeks left of time in Ecuador before I was returning back to Ireland. So I returned back to the pristine rainforest at Finca Matlos. My friend, actually, I didn't tell this part of the story, but as I landed in Ecuador, before leaving, I was really wishing I could find some way of connecting with mushrooms there. I was really, yeah, just dreaming. It's my biggest passion and interest. And I was going, I wonder what there could be. I wonder what I could find. And I didn't know even what to research. It's like, how would I look that up before I went? So the day first day I ever landed in Ecuador, I put a post on Facebook of bienvenido, of the doormat, welcome. And I just mentioned I landed there. And I immediately got this message from this incredible man who I did not know lived in Ecuador. I assumed he was living in Ireland because he was a member of the Mushroom Foraging Ireland Facebook group I started. But he joins every mushroom group in the whole world. And he invited me down to his amazing eco lodge in the rainforest. So upon arrival, I was invited, actually he invited me because there was a very famous American mycologist visiting Alan Rockefeller and some other American mycologists. So upon landing, I had 2 weeks and nothing to do. And I immediately, upon my feet landing in Ecuador, I got an invitation to go to the jungle and study mushrooms with some mycologists. So after the Andes Mountains, I returned to this eco lodge deep, deep, deep in the rainforest down near Puyo, in the south, towards the south of Ecuador. And it's like this little piece of absolute heaven, very pristine, untouched rainforest. So the petroleum companies haven't yet set into that area. So I saw both sides of that, that issue. And so I was no longer sick from my gastroenteritis, and I had a renewed sense of vigor and vitality and 2 weeks. So I returned to the rainforest. And lockdown kind of really, I guess COVID was really, really becoming bigger and bigger in everyone's awareness. And these last 2 weeks, I kept hearing more and more and more about it, even from deep in the rainforest. And I was very remote, very deep in, but whispers of what was happening all around the world were coming in fast. And it became apparent that probably it might be very difficult for me to get a flight back home out of Ecuador. My flight was due to leave on the 18th of March. And as the day approached, Ecuador had shut its borders and shut down the country very quickly. There was no travel within Ecuador, and I was told by everyone that there's no flights leaving the country. So I was faced with this dilemma of, would I travel 12 hours up to Quito to try and get a flight that might not go and be stuck in a big city that wasn't very nice and didn't have the comforts of the jungle and beauty and wildness and a close friend? Or would I stay where I was in the rainforest and maybe be stuck for months? It was a bit of a really tough decision. I remember asking the Facebook world, social media, what would you do if you were me? And half the people kind of said I would stay, and half the people went, get home with your family, you know, are you mad? But it was very uncertain what would be the best option, because I very easily could have been stuck in Quito for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. And I did decide at the last minute to take the trip, the 12-hour journey back up to Quito, and I got one of the last planes that left Ecuador for a long time. And it
Lucky
was my
you.
scheduled
Wow.
flight. Yeah, it was very lucky. There were people trying to get on that flight that I had just luckily already had booked for that return date, and they were paying up to $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 to get on the plane because there was no other options out.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember traveling through world airports like Amsterdam. I went from Quito to Guayaquil to Amsterdam to Dublin, and walking through these huge airports. And it was like zombie apocalypse. There was no one to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
It was, yeah, like a scene out of a film. It was really eerie and strange.
Mm-hmm.
And I also didn't know would I get stuck in any of those airports because everything was so very uncertain in those days.
Yeah.
Well, I did make it back to Ireland, and I was relieved to see my family again and to be back home. And I guess I returned home though to facing a lot of decisions I'd made that had been really challenging while I was away. I had decided to manifest great change in my life and a lot of personal challenges that were really deep and difficult for me. And I had started this project. Oh, sorry, go on.
It's interesting you're saying that because from what I remember, you were saying that the shaman said that the path was going to be very clear for you. So how did that help you? It sounded like he had your back.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I had just been about to launch Hips and Haws Wildcrafts officially into the world. I'd been doing it and speaking as Hips and Haws for quite a while, and sometimes speaking at events or offering small workshops and doing mushroom events, but it was still quite new to me. And at that time, I'd been working for someone else. So from March of 2020, I had planned to launch myself fully and full time into this with the wild garlic season. And yeah, everything was locked down and shut down. So for many months, I parked my tiny home bus project in the woods, deep in the woods. I collected it upon my return from Ecuador. It had been started about 1 year previous. I had bought this huge 28-seater Mercedes bus, 1995, used to be an Irish bus. And I had this dream always of, well, a camper van. At different times I'd bought them and things didn't really work out. It wasn't what I imagined it to be. But I always had this dream of a space that I could bring home with me wherever I went. And I decided to go big. I tend to do that. I didn't do it halfway. So I had to get a lorry license, an HGV license, which took almost a whole year and about €2,000 for lessons and tests. And I'm a lorry driver now with an HGV license. So I just before leaving for Ecuador, I left my bus in the Midlands with a couple who do them up for a living. And they really inspired me by the way they work, and they were really able, we shared the same vision. So when I came back, it was exactly as I'd hoped and dreamed. And it was fully off-grid, sustainable tiny home with solar panels and a compost toilet and a big double bed and a kitchen and a sofa and a wood-burning stove. So a very comfortable, magical space.
Exactly. Wow.
So I parked that in the woods upon my return.
Uh-huh.
And I did spend a lot of time alone. I was deeply reflecting my life and the changes and integrating, and I did a 5-day water fast alone in the woods, and I spent a lot of time contemplating my path. And while the shaman had said it was clear to me or clear to him, I felt quite strong in my resolve that I was at a very transitional time in my life, that my son was now a young man, and I just took steps to manifest great change. And I'm still kind of reeling from those changes. I've been speaking about the pain of change lately a lot in my posts on social media. And I suppose this time for me was beautiful and painful. And I still deeply grieving what change can bring. It can be almost like a death. I think I'm experiencing it that way. The death of my old self, maybe the death of the path I had chosen before and what wasn't going to be anymore. And I'm feeling deep pain and grief now, and also this sense of lightness that I've listened to my heart, and I'm I'm forging this path that I see, that I also saw through the curandero's eyes, of a new way of being in the world that feels very connected and
in many ways, what you're describing is very, very well accompanied by what COVID did to the world, you know, bringing that energy of transition and a before and an after, and a death as well, a sense of collapse, a bit of old values, maybe.
yeah.
For a while anyway. In the first confinement, it really felt like, wow, there's a sense of completely difference, you know, between the before and the after, a contrast.
Yeah.
And so how did you sense, or how did you embrace your project, Hips and Haws, differently? Or how did that happen?
So yeah, everything was on hold and cancelled, and luckily people were very happy to stick with me and postpone, because I had sold a lot of those tickets. A lot of the events were sold out from many months beforehand, and it was really nice that mostly everyone was very happy to postpone and do things with me later throughout the seasons. And from August, things kind of loosened up a little bit, and I could hold outdoor events. And I had the outdoor coastal forage that you attended in Wicklow, where there was an abundance of medicinal and edible wild plants. Just thinking that in that month, I think it was the end of August that we met. Yeah, and just there's just such a
amazing,
incredible abundance there and diversity. And yeah, as mushroom season came around, it was really exciting for me. I waited all year for that to happen, and Wicklow is an incredible place for fungi. And just with always the threat that things were going to get shut down again, which eventually they did. But I did get through much of mushroom season. And again, people were willing to postpone their events, some of them till autumn of 2021, which is really kind, you know, but there's a lot of interest in people. Yeah, really great that they're willing to wait a whole year now to do that again with me. So I'm just about to put up my events again for 2021, and really hoping that things will allow that we can go ahead with this kind of nourishing connection and sharing of experiences.
Absolutely, yes. It's part of the new strands of connecting with nature and the natural world that we need to really stimulate, for sure. And one of the other things that you've worked at and that you love as well is fermentation.
Yeah, absolutely. I get so excited by the transformation that occurs through fermentation and the preservation, the way of preserving this wildness through the seasons. So it's a huge passion of mine, and I do tend to nerd out on books and zoom in and just obsess over the details until they really get in my head and I understand the process, like what's exactly happening there. Yeah, you asked me earlier about my influences and my teachers. So Sandor Katz would be familiar with him. And yeah, so his books have taught me a lot, and his clear expression of explaining difficult processes with a very clear language. So I watch his videos online, his interviews, his things, and I think I emulate his language, or I try to. I really like to speak clearly, and I like to understand things to the level that I then can express it clearly, because I think that means you really understand it. Yeah. And so yeah,
you do that very well. You pass on and you convey your passion really, really well. Go on.
Yeah, maybe Sandor Katz does that too, and that's why I really connect to him. He has a clear language to explain difficult things that I find inspiring and easy to learn from. And so yeah, I learned from his books, but I also was really lucky to meet him at a private dinner through the Fumbly with Aisling.
Oh, wonderful! I didn't know.
Yeah, that was really special. I was really, I think I was very much considering myself at this stage, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, still that it was quite a private exploration of fermentation for me and my friends, but I wasn't teaching it or offering it to the world. And so to realize I was invited to sit around a table with 10 others who had been chosen because of their interest in fermentation to be there with Sandor Katz at a private dinner, I was really like, oh, I don't even know how this happened, but delighted. And yeah, so that was really nice. So he inspires me greatly. Also, Pascal Baudard, he's a Belgian who lives in California. His books really inspire me. His Instagram has loads of great information. He's very generous with sharing his recipes, and he's done a lot more teaching on Zoom now since lockdown too. So his teaching is accessible all around the world for $30 a class.
I can
even
get some details on that as well.
Yeah. So for me, the passion of fermentation is the transformation, and yeah, being able to preserve these foods that hopefully are, you know, sourced with love from our local environment and seasonal, or foraged from the wild. It's a method to transform them into something new, and in the same time preserve them, and also maybe increase their nutritional content, their bioavailability of the nutrients to us. There's so much happening there that the flavors transform, and it changes from one thing into something very different.
Mm-hmm.
And that inspires me. I love to see the magic of that, the alchemy of that.
Exactly, yeah. And tell us a little bit about what's your most your favorite food, fermented food at the moment. I saw on your Facebook account you were talking about koji.
Mm-hmm.
I actually heard Sandro Katz mentioning it in an interview recently, because he has a book just out about fermentation as a way of life, as a metaphor for life.
So yeah, you know the answer to that question. For me at the moment, my biggest, most exciting exploration in fermentation is koji. It's this magical, well, for one, I guess it's the Venn diagram of my interests. So it's a mold, so it's a fungus, so it's a mushroom, and it affects great transformation in food. When we grow or cultivate koji onto something like rice, for example, or barley or soybeans, which I've started doing in my hot press, and it's just like amazing to grow this wild, this wet, white, thick, fluffy mold onto something like rice. And then what you can use that moldy rice to make is things such as soy sauce, miso, sake, all kinds of alcohols, really exciting ways you can go. And yeah.
Where do you find it? Where do you source it?
You can buy the mold culture online. There's a new kind of European-based website, which is called, I believe it's fermentationcultures.eu, but I could be wrong. It comes up very quick in the search by koji.
But it's from Japanese origin, or where does it come from?
Yeah, I think actually originally Chinese origin, but Japan would also have carried forth this in a same kind of timeline.
Yeah, okay, wonderful. So what can we find? What else can we find in your kitchen in terms of fermented food and pickles, etc.?
Yeah. So fermented foods, as much as being food, are also very much an intentional medicine for myself. I had a lot of gut issues, had antibiotics over and over and over as a child, just for ear infections, probably due to the dairy allergy, which meant that my gut was destroyed. So I very consciously eat a lot of fermented foods, and I really see the difference in myself, in my vitality, and my robustness of health. So if I don't eat them, I really feel it missing. So I would constantly have sauerkraut on the go. I would always have milk kefir, even being dairy intolerant. Milk kefir is a really important medicine for me, small amounts of that. Mm-hmm. Also small amounts of yogurt. In both cases, the lactose has been broken down, and that's important for my intolerance, which is mostly the lactose that I can tolerate. So when it's been fermented, it's a little easier form for me to take in small quantities.
Sure.
So on a constant basis, it would be at least those three things. I'd often have some sort of koji experiment happening. So right now I've just brought something out of the hot press that's now ready to taste, and I haven't yet tasted it yet. It was shiitake mushrooms, which I bought from the Asian market. Mm-hmm. The rest was foraged or made by me. I grew the rice koji, which was one ingredient, and then I had a huge abundance of porcini mushrooms this year. Yeah, it was
Right.
a very exciting year for any mushroom foragers, because this year was the first time in like 30 years that there was more porcini mushrooms than your eye could even see. There were thousands of them. It was crazy. So I put that together with the rice koji, salt, and the two kinds of mushrooms, and it becomes this amino paste, which is another way of describing a sort of a soy sauce. This very amino rich, umami kind of flavoring. I'm going to add it. I imagine it's very rich tasting, full of umami. Umami happens because the amino acids break down.
I'm not sure what umami is, and I'm not sure if anybody is.
Okay, umami is kind of a term everyone's saying at the moment. It's a buzzword.
Oh, is it? Okay.
It's like the sixth flavor sensation. It's a super rich, like seaweeds have umami and mushrooms have umami.
It's a taste.
It's a taste. It's a richness. It's a very, I can explain where it comes from. Umami comes from the Japanese word for delicious, which is umai. But it happens when, for example, when we use koji and we take something that's high protein, like meat or these legumes and beans, and they're broken down into amino acids. The amino acids have loads of flavor. That's like what soy sauce is.
And miso.
Yeah, and miso. They have that umami quality. It's because the amino acids are broken down, and that gives us a huge burst of flavor.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We're going to wrap up. I suppose that we could continue to talk forever because it's fascinating. At the moment, I know you have a fermentation class coming up.
Well, no, actually, everything due to for one, yeah, there isn't one now until the new year because of social distancing guidelines. It's quite difficult, even if they allow indoor gatherings again, to do that in a way that allows social distancing is a little bit challenging for the moment, especially in the fermentation shed that I have. It's a big, beautiful table that's kind of from an old science lab, but in order to socially distance, it would still be a challenge. So my next events are on my social media links in my profile. And the next one starting up are the end of March for wild garlic. And we're going to have a whole day out, have a lot of tasters of wild food. We're going to forage for wild garlic and anything else that's forageable in the season. And we're going to process the wild garlic that we find that day into food and medicine together. So it's a full day experience, and there'll be some of those at the end of March. And as soon as time and space allows for social distancing safely, I will have the fermentation events and other things happening soon too.
Because you're super popular. You have like 5,000 followers on Facebook in one page, another 4 or 5 in the other, and on your Instagram you have loads of followers as well. So I wanted to ask you as well, how have you seen a kind of an increase in popularity really quickly recently, or how has it grown for you? Because it seems to be a buzzword, rewilding and foraging at the moment.
Yeah, I think even for fermentation, I think I did start it well before it was, there's a few people doing it, but when I started also, there wasn't a lot of people into it as there is now. Yeah, the interest has grown exponentially and quickly, which doesn't surprise me because this was in other places, like visiting my sister in Vancouver, been a bigger deal for a lot longer, as have mushrooms and their medicinal qualities, and whether you're foraging for them yourself or using them as medicine. Mushroom coffee, for example, doesn't sound like a weird thing in Vancouver, whereas here, when I say it, people still kind of go, would you not just drink a normal cup of coffee? But that's not the point. Whether it's coffee or not coffee, if it's made from mushrooms and other medicinal things like dandelion roots and burdock root, or what else do I put in? Acorns in my coffee, toasted acorns, chaga mushroom and reishi and all turkey tails, all these things that are incredibly immune boosting, and it's no longer so strange. A lot of people know what it is, and Finn from the Hop Sack in Rathmines sells a lot of these mushroom products and mushroom coffees, and he's really into it. It's a great place to go also if you're looking for these things.
Great, thank you. Yeah, And so thank you so much for your time, Courtney. Is there anything you want to add?
No, thank you too. It's a real honor, and it's so nice talking to you in this way. So thank you.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Courtney.